Let's talk about depressive disorders. The description that they have with depressive disorders are disturbances or extremes in emotion, and they vary in terms of duration and severity, meaning your emotions can go from like very docile to very eccentric, and it could happen for 5 minutes or it could happen for months. And so it's a disturbance. It's a change in what your normal emotion already is. One of the types of depressive disorders that they have is what they call episodic. It involves a particular occasion or episode of severe, persistent mood disturbances that is clearly distinguished from prior function. So again, they would have to figure out the baseline of what your prior functioning would be, and then from there, at that point in time, they would try to figure out, do you have a mood disturbance that would change from that is different than what you would normally act like. And what they would say is it involves a particular occasion or an episode. And does it, what causes it, what triggers it? And that would be an episodic part. And think of it like a TV episode. You watch one episode, unless you're binge watching, but you watch one episode, and then that's what they're considering as a depressive disorder. Or you have a chronic one. This is probably more of what we think of when we think of somebody with a depressive disorder as chronic. It is somebody with a long standing, 2 years, illness with either continuous or intermittent disturbance in moods, meaning it happens all the time, every day when they get up from sun up till sundown, or intermittent, throughout the day, an hour or two, whatever. More this type of depressive disorder is more prolonged, meaning it lasts longer, but it's not as severe as those associated with episodic. Episodic disorders are like it hits them, and all of a sudden they're just really, really down, or their emotions are really, really changing, and then it kind of goes away. But this one, chronic, is just kind of you've the reason why it's not as severe perhaps is because you've learned to live with it, and it's just kind of continued on in your life, and so you've kind of figured out how to manage it. The individual's overall mood, it tends to fall at one extreme or the other. So when we think about somebody that is depressed, it could be two things that could be happening. They could be actually depressed, which means that they're very down, very somber, very want to withdraw. They just feel inept. They feel sad, or manic. And so what happens with manic is like everything's crazy. Like, you got to get away from me, and they're talking 100 miles an hour, and their thoughts are running 100 miles an hour, and the things that they're trying to accomplish, and they just feel overwhelmed. And that's the manic side. And so one of the things that happens is you have somebody that you hear of, somebody that is a bipolar individual. We'll get to that in a little bit, but that's where they kind of get this. But an individual's overall mood tends to fall at one extreme or another, not in the middle. In the middle is pretty much how everybody would, quote unquote, normally act. Often called the common cold of psychological disorders. You might be like, what do you mean by common cold? Pretty much everybody gets a cold at some point in time in their life or not. And so with depressive disorders, a lot of times it seems to fall at one of these two things, and it's just manic or depressive. But it's very common for people to get depressive disorders. And so that's why they call it the common cold of psychological disorders, because it's pretty common that people actually get this. It affects twice as many women as it does men. Now, what is the science behind that? There could be a lot of things. There could be like the pressure or the stress of, acting a certain way. Part of it could be that men really don't care what others think, and women tend to care what other people think, and that could be part of that. But it tends to affect twice as many women as it does men. The symptoms of depression could be a loss of energy. You just feel kind of like, blah. Extreme sadness. Obviously, you're very upset, sad about certain things. You are not able to sleep. Maybe you don't feel like eating. A lot of times, people that go through depression a lot of times lose weight because they just don't feel like eating. A sense of guilt, like they've done something wrong, or perhaps it's guilt that other people have put on them. That could be a huge thing of depression, where people have made them feel guilty and they shouldn't necessarily feel guilty. Recurrent thoughts of death or suicide, obviously that could be the extreme of depression. It doesn't have to be, but that would be the extreme, and that could be part of being depressed, where it could lead you to having these thoughts of committing suicide or killing yourself. So depression is one of those things that tends to, I think we're seeing, I don't want to say more of it, but people are more open about it, which is probably a good thing because it helps people understand people with depressive disorders. but you'd be surprised at how common it could be. Now, symptoms of the other side of things, mania, that would be hyperactivity, where you just can't stop. Everything's just like crazy, and you want to go 100 miles an hour. And euphoria is like a sense of like kind of being off and doing your own thing, and everything's just great. Decreased need for sleep, where you just feel like you just don't want to go to sleep. You just keep going and going and going and going, and you run on maybe an hour or two. Talkativeness. Well, can you believe that this person did this? I can blah blah, and they just keep talking 100 miles an hour, and you can't stop. Inflated self-esteem, meaning you feel like I can do this. No one else can do this. It's just me. I need to have this happen. And then excessive involvement in activities with no regard for consequences, meaning all of a sudden you start participating in activities that you're like, I don't care what the consequences are. I'm just going to keep doing it. It could be buying sprees. You might be like, what does that mean? It means you just go to the store and start buying stuff that you don't need, stuff that maybe satisfies your mania. And you don't think about how much you can't afford to do this. Business investments, a crazy business investment. Oh man, I'm going to invest in this type of business, and I'm sure it's going to be awesome, and it might not be a very good investment. Sexual indiscretions, basically sleeping around, and sexual promiscuity with whoever you want, whenever you want, with no regard for sexually transmitted diseases or the moral ramifications of this. Reckless driving, hey, I'll be fine. Nobody's going to stop me. I'm going to be fine. I got a seatbelt. I've never gotten in a car accident before, and that would be part of that. And then they even have flight of ideas. These are rapid shifts in conversation from one subject to another based on superficial associations, meaning all of a sudden you're talking about, oh man, I love my Apple, my MacBook. I just think it's so great. Vacation was really fun. And did you see that sun over there? That reminds me of being in California. The sun was just so beautiful in California. And that's the idea of flight of ideas. It's a rapid shift in conversation from one subject to another with no real like rhyme or reason necessarily. Superficial means like a superficial cue, like you see the sun, you see a puppy walk by, which puppies are really cute, so that could be easily distractible. But those are the symptoms of mania. And again, for people with depression, it is for this type of disorder, the depressive disorder, you are usually on one side or the other, depression or mania. Letter B, the types of disorders. Major depressive disorder. One or more depressive episode lasting longer than 2 weeks, resulting in significant impairment of physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral functioning. So when you hit this, you would go see a doctor and you would explain to them, yes, I'm having this depressive episode and it lasts longer than 2 weeks. It's happening longer. And it is resulting in me, I can't sleep, I can't eat, I'm ruining emotional relations, my relationships with people are ruined. It's clouding my judgment. And you would sit down with them and talk to them, and they would diagnose you with major depressive disorder. Suicidal risk is significant concern associated with this diagnosis, mainly because the episode is so great that people feel like they can't escape it, and so therefore they feel like the best way is to commit suicide, which generally does not. I mean, it solves the problem of you living, I guess, if that you consider that a problem, which unfortunately some people do. The problem becomes with this is a lot of times they don't realize that the suicide also affects those who are around them as well. This is also referred to as unipolar depression, meaning unipolar, not bipolar, meaning you are either completely manic depressive or you're completely depressive, and so you're not in the middle. Dysthymic disorder. This is a milder but more chronic form of depression. More chronic means it happens regularly and lasts more than 2 years. So if you talk to somebody like, man, let me give you a scenario. Let's say, unfortunately, this happens for people, but let's say that you lose a child. You're a parent. You lose a child to a disease or to a car accident, and that happened 3 years ago. And 3 years later, you're still dealing with the ramifications of this. And the depression, you just feel like you don't want to get out of bed. You feel just you don't want to eat. You're struggling with it. And that form of depression can last more than 2 years. And during this time, symptoms cannot be absent for more than 2 months at a time. So out of 12 months out of the year, you have to have these depressive symptoms for at least, I guess, well, let me say it this way. You cannot have those during that 12-month cycle for more than 2 months at a time. So out of those 10 months, or out of those 12 months, you need to be in that state of depression for at least 10 months. It involves long-lasting but milder depression symptoms. So again, you might be able to get out of bed, you might not, but it just kind of depends. The depression symptoms are generally milder than those with major depressive disorder. The everyday functioning is less impaired than that is the case with major depression. So you are able to kind of function, but it wouldn't be as debilitating as the major depressive disorder, and mainly because you tend to become used to what is happening, and that could be part of that, and you've adjusted yourself. As far as bipolar disorder it involves period of major depression and mania, resulting in significant impairment of physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral functioning. Was formerly called manic depression or manic depressive. So once in a while I'll hear people say, "Oh man, my mom's bipolar. Like she just freaks out about everything." Well, your mom probably isn't bipolar, because bipolar would mean that she is manic, like crazy, everything's this, and then she's just as somber and doesn't want to get out of bed, maybe doesn't want to eat, physically debilitated. But just because your mom might want you to fold your clothes and fold your clothes and put your clothes away and help with the dishes, and then really wants to do well in your schoolwork, doesn't mean that she's bipolar. And then she's super nice to you a little bit later on. That doesn't mean that. So again, you got to be careful with these type of things, because nowadays when you say somebody's bipolar and somebody might be bipolar, they might be offended, and you got to be kind of careful with how you throw these terms around. Cyclothymic disorders, these are milder but more chronic form of bipolar. It should be form of bipolar. Form of bipolar disorder with depressive and hypomaniac symptoms that last for more than 2 years. And so we would say that you yourself would have to, again, last for more than 2 years with bipolar type symptoms. During these 2 years, the symptoms cannot be absent for more than 2 months at a time. Again, why did they do that? Because they're saying you might have to, you're fighting through it. If you only have it for 4 months out of the 12 months, then maybe you don't really have it. And so they want to make sure that they diagnose this stuff correctly. And then the last one, seasonal affective disorder. We talked about this a little bit earlier. This is referred to in the DSM-5 as depression with a seasonal pattern, which indicates at least 2 years of episodes of major depression that occurs only during particular times of the year. The depression is usually during the winter months and is believed to be associated with reduced sunlight. We go through this, and a lot of times we feel this way, but again, it's not technically depression. It has to be diagnosed by a doctor. And so therefore, even though we do not see the sun from basically like the beginning of November until beginning of March, we do kind of feel like sad. We kind of feel like, I just don't really feel like doing anything. You eat bad. You want to sleep and just binge watch Netflix. That's not a depression necessarily. But what can happen in colder climates, Alaska, Russia, these other areas, people can actually get diagnosed with the seasonal affective disorder, by which they have major depression that kicks in during this time, and they need sunlight to actually help them pull themselves out of this. And so that can be diagnosed by a psychologist that you have seasonal affective disorder. You guys might be like, maybe I should go see the doctor during the winter months. Well, that, or you move to a warmer climate when you actually get some sunshine. Although at Christmas time it was beautiful. I remember Elliot was sitting out in the front yard reading a book on a chair on Christmas. Never thought we would see the day. Anyway, that is it for this one. We'll talk about the causes of mood disorders moving forward. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. If you have any questions, let me know.